it's lovely outside. No, as a requirement of by law, I have to apologize for the weather in San Diego. I think it was 73 today, and there was a hint of cloud, which is just crushing to us. So, hope you all had a good day so far and a good time in San Diego. And I'm Steve Stanton. I'm the president and CEO of the Fleet Science Center. And I know what you're asking. You're saying to yourself, my Comic-Con experience would not be complete unless I knew what he was talking about when I say the Fleet Science Center. So I'm going to break Comic-Con tradition, and I'm going to plug something. I know you're shocked. I know we're shocked, but there we go. The Fleet Science Center is San Diego Science Center, Interactive Science Center, right up here in Balboa Park. If you have not been to Balboa Park, what's Balboa Park? It is the best place you can be if you're not in Comic-Con. So if you need to take a break, I don't know why you'd want to, but if you do, or you've got time before or after, head out to Balboa Park, come to the Fleet Science Center. We've got great interactive exhibitions there, and some of you may be fans of Mythbusters. 1, 2.
Oh, thank goodness. We're in the right place.
We're in the right room. Okay, good.
Yeah, no kidding. So you're in luck, because right now we are hosting an exhibition called Mythbusters, the Explosive Exhibition. Because it's an exhibition, they wanted to really make sure, Jeff, we needed to make sure that this was what it's called. But Mythbusters, the exhibition, is an incredible collection of props, footage, devices from the show, the actual stuff, so devices that may have exploded paint or flying devices made out of duct tape, plus a whole host of hands-on interactives where you get to come up and be the Mythbusters yourself. So if you get a chance, come on up to the Fleet and check it out. Now, that of course is not why I'm here. I'm more than happy to talk about it at length. It's my job most of the time. But I'll spare you that because we are here to talk about, what are we talking about? We're talking about science, engineering, and myth-busting. And we have got an absolutely awesome panel, so let me introduce them to you. I'm going to introduce them randomly because how they're on my paper is different of how they sat them down. And it is 7 o'clock on a Thursday late in the week, and so aligning, this just be too much. So let me start off with Brian, who's at the end. Brian is an astrophysicist, author, professor of physics at UCSD, an all-around cool guy. Then we've got an ecologist, biologist, conservationist, and the coordinator of the Marine Protected Area and Protected Area Watch Program, Angela Kemsley. All right. She brought her fan base with her. All right, we've got neuroscientist, medical director, and professor at USC, Tiffany Chow. The remaining three need no introduction. Okay, just in case any of you walked into the wrong room and now are realizing it's the right room, or maybe you've been, The Walking Dead for the last 20 years. This is the Mythbusters build team. We have got Crash Test Girl, Carrie Byron. The Daredevil, Tori Belici. And the electronics and robotics expert, Graham Imanhara. So we're going to do this as we do most panels, right? I'm going to ask them some questions. They're going to talk a lot about cool stuff, and then we'll switch it over to you for some questions at the mics when the time comes. I'll give you a warning when we're about to get there. So we're talking about science, engineering, and myth-busting. And if you read anything online about Mythbusters, you've seen that the episodes have been used in classrooms all over the place. They're highlighted as probably one of the breakthrough science communication shows that we've had in the last 20 years, really hugely influential. But if you go online, for some reason, there's also some negative stuff out there, people complaining that it's not science. So let's start this off right. I want to ask the scientist, Mythbusters, is it science?
Oh, we're scientists?
Yeah,
I
sorry. I thought you were talking. We play scientists on television.
What do you think? Do you consider it science?
It's the best part of science.
Well, see, I think here is the problem is people think of science as something that a talking head has to instruct you at instead of an experience that we have in our everyday life. I mean, there's so much science right here in this phone, and I know you all have one in your pocket. There's science in everything we do, and we just happen to find the scientific method is the perfect narrative vehicle for busting myths. So we use science in every single one of our episodes just as a tool.
Yeah, and I've found in my own experience, I work a lot with community-based conservation, so community-based science, and when I go out to the public and I ask people to describe a scientist, a lot of the time I get, well, it's probably a man with crazy hair and a lab coat, right? That's the idea that people have of scientists. But think about that. If that person didn't have crazy hair, could they still be a scientist? Absolutely. If they didn't have a lab coat on, could they still be a scientist? Absolutely, right? A scientist can be an everyday person. And really, science is all about asking questions. And I love to make that point as well. Science is all about just making observations, asking questions. So if you think about it, who asks the most questions, right? If it's asking, what's that, what's that, what's that, why? The biggest group of scientists we have are probably kindergartners.
Yes.
Yeah, I for one think there should be a Mythbusters University, and I would apply for tenure there. Because I think
There actually is. There's a place called New Mexico Tech where you could get a degree in blowing stuff up. So
Energetic materials, I believe.
All right, I'll apply. Put in a
Yes.
good word for me.
I know, when I told him I was doing this panel, he's like, that is like a whole other level of science. Like, it's one thing to be like, well, there are 7 peer-reviewed journal articles on this, but when you say, the Mythbusters showed this, that's like...
We solved a lot of bar bets over the years, let me tell you.
So for our folks from the Mythbusters here, you guys kind of got into this doing props and special effects for movies. So over the years, did you guys kind of develop, and how did your technique and process evolve during the show?
Well, we started with books, and then we got the internet. So it got a lot easier to find myths and figure out how to test them.
And thanks to the internet, it basically propagated, like all these misconceptions just kept growing and growing, and we literally would just go online, and it was like, oh my gosh, like we thought we were gonna run out of myths the first season. And then all of a sudden online, it was like, this story popped up, and it was like, this show's gonna go on forever.
You know, one of the things I discovered early on was that, and we would design and build all of the things that we had on the show, ourselves. And one of the things I discovered was it is significantly easier to talk about something if you have actually done research on it yourself, better than somebody handing you a piece of paper saying, here's what you have to say. When you go online and you do research and talking to actual scientists, experts, we would contact them. We would call people out of the blue and say, hi, I'm Grant, I'm calling from Mythbusters. What do you think if I used Jell-O to simulate a brain during a crash test? Would that be an okay? And the cool thing about speaking to these professionals is that they would actually take your question seriously and say, well, okay, let's talk about the kinematics of that and see if that is a real thing. And in the end, having talked to a scientist yielded a much better presentation for me on that science.
And it was fun for them. It's so fun for them to get a really outside-the-box question when you call somebody in academia, and they've probably heard a lot of the same questions, and to come up with something so weird and wild, they're like, yes, something to wrap their head around.
So on that topic, since I have a moment, the brain should not be done with Jell-O. It should be done with seared foie gras.
Oh, yeah.
Foie gras.
Oh, yeah.
That's a lot of foie gras. That's a very, I think we were on a Discovery Channel budget. Like that's more.
Maybe you could get a collaboration with the Food Channel, because science is about collaboration.
It's good to know. Okay, seared foie gras, because I also used udon noodles in Jell-O once to give it a little more of a durometer that felt, no.
By feel alone, I'm pretty sure, right, Carrie?
What?
By judging that by feel alone?
Well, you know, like I watched a lot of zombie movies, and so it looked like about the squishiness.
That's the way to use your noodle.
Hey!
Oh, that's the only one I'm going to do. Sorry.
That's
sorry.
such a lie.
I could not resist. Sorry.
Let the puns begin.
Yeah.
So in watching the Mythbusters show from our scientists, what did you see as sort of the differences from what you do every day, and what are the similarities?
There's a lot of Newtonian mechanics, so I'm sitting, honored to be sitting next to Grant, who I think of mostly as a projectile.
In many, many ways.
That's right. So I think the thing that really speaks to me is not necessarily, you know, are they demonstrating what the properties of quantum mechanics are like, but they're showing that science is not about, you know, these prepackaged, canned experiments that we know the results to. We often do an experiment, and the whole point of getting a PhD in my research group or other research groups is to do something that no human being has ever done before, and by definition, you don't know if it's going to work. And so the fact that you guys show the failures as much as you show the successes, I think that's the most accurate portrayal of science that you can find.
Thanks.
So how important was failure both to, from the scientist's point of view and for the show's point of view?
We put it on a T-shirt. It always gave us an out. No, it gave us something to learn by, and if we failed, it was actually really fun for us because it gave us something to just dig our teeth into to continue.
We did one experiment. It was that chunks of blue ice were landing on houses. And so the myth was that...
Wait, tell them what blue ice is, first of all, in case they don't know.
Well, I'm going to explain that. So the myth was that these airplanes, their toilets were leaking. And so up at 30,000 feet, the leak would turn into a big chunk of ice. And it was blue because that's what they used in the toilets on the airplanes. And so as it was coming into land, it would warm up, and the big chunk of ice would fall off the plane and crash into houses. And now there are people who said, I've had a big chunk of blue ice crash through my roof. And so we were like, okay, is this real? So we built a section of an airplane. Grant and I went out to NASA in Alabama, and they had a freezing air tunnel. And so we brought this section of plane. We had a little hose with blue water. We were going to test this, and all the scientists, and these are actual rocket scientists, they were looking at us. They're like, "It ain't going to work. This is not going to work. This is not going to work." And we're just like, "Yeah, it probably won't work, but we're going to try it anyway." So we set it up. We start the leak. It's like zero. I forget how cold it was, but it was freezing.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, like within minutes, we created this giant chunk of blue ice on the section of plane. And all the scientists were like, man, for us to do something like this, it would be like millions of dollars and like 3 months to get something like this to work. And we're just like, oh, we just got lucky.
We did it in 3 days.
I sometimes like to think about what if you guys could go back like 2,000 years ago and show people like Aristotle, who had all these crazy ideas that were totally wrong, like a heavy object falls faster than a lighter one, and actually just break those myths, and how much farther society and science would have advanced if you guys existed 2,000 years ago.
So, well, just thinking about freezing. So, Brian, you do a lot of cold stuff.
True,
right?
that's
a lot
true.
of kind of things here. So, in your actual work, how much of it mirrors the kind of process you see in Mythbusters? How much of the kind of things that people now have all here seen is stuff that you're doing in the lab as well?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot about science is, I mean, the word science in ancient Greek, if people can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it means knowledge. And it means really the collection of facts. But you don't just dispassionately collect facts. There's always a human being that is at the heart of what the scientific process is about. And we rarely sit down with our white lab coat, as Carrie was saying, and dispassionately think about these. There's always a human being at work as well. And so, like any other human being, scientists, despite the stereotypes, have their own, the prejudices, biases, whatever. And I think the hardest part about being a scientist, Richard Feynman, famous scientist at Caltech, once said, you have to think that you're going to be fooled, and you're the easiest person to be fooled. And I think if you can have that mindset that you have to be careful and you have to do things ethically, then you can maintain the integrity of science. And I think showing your work and actually the error and trial and error, that's the most important part. That's where people learn, and that's where society and science itself can move forward.
So, Angela, I know you do a lot of work with citizen scientists, right? So, clearly, it's all their fault that we have all these citizen scientists now, right? So how is that work going? How does this idea of people, anybody, becoming a scientist and actually adding to, again, sort of the larger scientific knowledge?
Yeah, so the idea of citizen science is actually not new. The first citizen science program was the Christmas bird count that was done over 100 years ago. But the idea behind it was that, we had this idea of a scientist being someone who looked nothing like most of us. And so science was always just this subject that was taught in school, and it wasn't part of our everyday lives. And we were realizing that there was this big disconnect between the general public and science. And so this idea of citizen science came about, and I like to call it community science because everybody can do it. And it's this really special field of science where we have data collection that's done by the public, by everyday people, which is fantastic for us because I work in something called marine protected areas. They're like state or national parks but underwater, and there are 124 of them in the state of California. I'm supposed to measure all of them, I'm supposed to monitor all of them, and my team consists of me and one other person. Right? So there is no way I'm monitoring all 124 of those marine protected areas. So what we do is we get the general general public involved. So I have thousands of people, thousands of just people from the general public who collect data for me. So now I get so much more data than I could possibly collect myself, which is great for me. But then we also have everyday people who are actually getting out, they're doing real science, they're getting connected to their natural areas, and so then they come to be proud of their areas, they conserve it, so it's really great for both of us.
Is that like a Tom Sawyer Huck Finn thing where you collecting data is super fun? Who wants to do it?
Oh, it is super fun because my program, all you have to do is you take a walk on the beach and you count people. So as long as you like long walks on the beach and you can count to like 50, you can do science.
Awesome. That's a good pitch. I like
Do a
it.
lot of science.
I think I can make a plug also for the fact that we find that people will age better brain-wise if they feel connected, if they feel like they're contributing to something larger than themselves. So community science data collection is a fantastic way of getting that to happen. And the resilience that you require to get through the failures and to keep asking questions like, okay, so why didn't that work? That's really important for all kinds of things that your brain does for you, such as modulating mood, making sure that you can switch to different topics and learn new things.
So a couple of times this idea has come up again. We heard the team, people working together. Clearly one of the best things about the build team was the team piece, the three of you working together on this. So how important, both for the show, was that aspect of it, and how important does that actually play out? Because we all know, in addition to the scientist being the bald white male with the graying beard,
Not a stereotype.
but is also alone in their lab waiting for the eureka moment.
Well, I found for our problem solving, the diversity of our group was really important, which is why I definitely would advocate for diversity in all problem solving environments of science. I had a cameraman, or we had a cameraman that called us technical, practical, logical, because we would all come to every single myth with a Tori was practical, I was logical, and Grant was technical, and one of our ideas was going to work or improve the others, because we all had such different backgrounds and ways of thinking. So I think, for me, diversity is really important.
Well, and it's so important too. Like, I grew up in California, so when I took this job, I was like, oh, I grew up in California, I got this, I know all of California. And then I get up to the North Coast, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna call at 6 o'clock, and you're gonna be on the phone at 6, no later than 6, and then we're gonna go this at 6:05, and this at 6:15, and they're like, no. They're like, by 6, you mean like 6:37, right? Because that's just the culture up there. And so, what I do is then I have local partners. I have 15 local partners throughout the state who know the culture, they know the area, right? I try to go out places, and then I get lost on the Lost Coast. It's called the Lost Coast for a reason. That's a great story. It ends with someone snuggling with a goose. But you get local people who know the area, they know the people, and they're able to give you that local knowledge, and that's super important because you don't have to do it by yourself. It's better with a team. You can get new ideas, get people who have different perspectives than you, and that's where we get really good science.
Yeah, I think the idea of collaborating on a problem and like Carrie said, coming at it from different perspectives, and really each person on the team brings their perspective, and then we as a group decide, okay, which thing are we going to do? How are we going to go about busting this myth? And then we vote on it essentially, and we debate it. And I don't think that there was one myth that I can remember where we all said the exact same thing. The exact same methodology for
Except when we wanted to blow something up. We're like,
yeah, definitely C4.
let's blow that up.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of us wanted to actually be the subject for the slapping machine. That one, I think we all were trying to volunteer each other
We
for
had
that
to,
one.
yeah, we had to rotate on that one, I believe.
I mean, Grant took our sword swinging rig and put a slapping hand on it so that we could see if you were retired, you could slap yourself back into a sobriety. That was awful. What is that noise?
That's the overflow room
I
for
was gonna
this
say,
one.
there's a time delay.
I know. Thank you over there. I feel you.
So, we talked a bit about failure before. So, because we're all here for good stories, what's your favorite? This is for the scientists as well. What's your favorite moment of failure?
I never really like it that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it's kind
Learn
of
from it,
painful.
but like it?
Well, maybe that's what I say. Right? When you say your favorite, you look back and say, yeah, boy, that sucked, but now I know better, or now I've actually learned
So
something.
you learn a lot from failure, and that's
Yeah.
the important thing. So I think Henry Ford said, failure is an opportunity to begin again better. So you basically want to learn as much as you can in the iterative process, because science never ends. And I like to think that, besides maybe climate science, I mean, nobody wakes up and says, I'm a Republican astronomer. I'm a Democratic astronomer. So having this notion that science is a continuing story that is inherently apolitical and can be used, for generating knowledge, then by definition almost, you can't really fail because you're learning something new in the process. Although we did have an event that I was a part of that we believe we had captured the very most beginning moments of the Big Bang through a telescope located at the South Pole, Antarctica. And we thought for sure we would win the Nobel Prize for doing so. And in the end, that was not to be. And we got tripped up in our pursuit of Nobel gold by the most humble substance in the cosmos, which is interstellar dust, these particles of dust that follow my kids around and also follow stars around throughout our galaxy. And it got in the way and mimicked an imposter way of what the signal we were looking for. But that, in turn, led us to create sort of new ways of approaching this problem that will eventually yield success and will take us back, and we won't trip up on make the same mistake twice. You never want to make the same mistake twice.
So we should have started that because we can't follow that. Because when we would fail, maybe a car would drive into a fence, and it would delay us by like a day because we'd have to roll the cable back up. So
I have a story of failure from the show. So we were doing a myth called red flag to a bull. And this is, you wave a red flag in front of a bull, they get angry. So we were working with bulls, we were at a rodeo. And to finish out the episode, we thought, let's do something easy. Let's do something fun that we know is going to work and going to give us a laugh. We'll do bull in a china shop. Saying that everybody knows it's a euphemism for a clumsy person. So we said, we've got the bulls. Let's buy a bunch of dime store dishes, put up some rickety shelves, send the bull in, they'll destroy everything, and we'll all laugh and go home. So we set this whole thing up at the rodeo. We have a very small pen. We've got our dishes set up. We send the bull in. No dishes were broken.
These animals, they're like 1,500-pound animals.
They're
They were
angry.
the most, like, they knew exactly, they were like dancing creatures. We were just like, how are these things so aware of their body? They were like ballerinas dancing through these shelves.
maybe the problem is they were rodeo bulls. Maybe we should have got some feral bulls.
And so we're like, okay, so the first one, maybe there's something wrong with the first one. Let's send in another one.
So now we have two bulls, and they just start following each other, not knocking anything off the shelves.
Maybe two's not enough. We go up to 4 bulls, and they're just following each other until one dish accidentally broke.
These were the most graceful animals I'd ever seen.
We like to say Tori broke more dishes when we were shopping for them than the bulls did, so we're changing the idiom to Tori in a china shop.
Well, if the shoe fits.
That myth is BS.
Oh.
Yeah. I can't say the real words. There's children here.
So the notions of science, the notions of the processes that you use in busting myths and working in the lab, does that follow outside the lab? Does it sneak outside? Do you find yourself going, do I buy this brand or that brand? Let me test something. So where does it follow out? Where do you actually use this out in the real world?
Well, I just wrote a book called Crash Test Girl where I apply the scientific method to all of my life's problems.
There you go.
On Mythbusters, we realized that, we could use the scientific method for our narrative for every single myth. I'm like, I feel like I've been using this in my entire life. I've always been somebody who throws down a big experiment to see how things go, whether it was applied to dating or going to college, or I always use that same methodology. So I feel like Mythbusters was a really nice fit for me.
What about our scientists?
I would say that it takes a lot more of a sample size to convince me of a point that I was not biased towards in the beginning in my real life. In science, it's pretty hard and cut and dry.
I don't know, I watched The Martian a while ago, and like the day after I watched it, I got this like
200-pound air conditioner that I had to get up my stairs by myself because I live with me and my little dog, and she was not helpful. And so I'm standing at the bottom of my staircase with this like several 100-pound air conditioner, and I'm like, I will get it up the stairs. And I like channeled my inner, Martian, and I was like, okay, I know some physics. I'm going to get this done. So I'm like calculating angles, and I'm like, okay, if I lift it at this angle, then I push with my knee, and I get this. I made it all the way up the stairs by myself. Thank you, and I did not hurt myself at all.
Nice.
And you made it back to Earth.
Yes.
I think for me, and noticing, so my wife and I have 5 kids now, which is pretty insane. But I see the progression from my 2-year-old daughter and my 5-year-old son and my 7-year-old son, and the newborns don't really count yet as scientists, although I know they're learning faster than I ever will. But I see the progression in how the questions get asked between the 2-year-old, the 5-year-old, and the 7-year-old. And there's a peak at age 5. And I think I've read a study about this, that the children's curiosity peaks at age 5, kindergarten, and then they stop asking questions at the same rate. And I'm thinking, like, how can I maximize this question answer? Because that's the important thing, is stimulating curiosity. And if you're curious and you have passion and you put those together, it's basically unstoppable. And I think of science as a superpower. We're in the right place for that. And when you have science, you always hear people say, oh, I'm not a science person, don't ask me that, or I'm not a math person. But no one will ever say, I'm not an English person, don't ask me to spell something, or they don't take sort of the pride in it. And I think that gives people an advantage if they can really inculcate what science, the most powerful tool for generating human knowledge in history of the planet. And I think it's really sort of our job as scientists to tap into that curiosity and prolong the long tail of this curiosity so that it goes beyond age 7, 10, whatever. Not to say that they can't, but just keep that curious spirit alive.
Yeah, and that's something really powerful for parents or for anybody who deals with kids, because I spent, over a decade in environmental education, and we'd get these students in who were 12 years old, and they'd ask us, what's that? And I'm like, well, make some observations. What does it look like? And they're like, I don't know how. And I'm like, well, what color is it? And they're like, oh. Well, it's green. I'm like, okay, what does it feel like? They're like, oh, okay, I can do that. And so just, encouraging them to ask questions, to think through it themselves, because quite often they could figure out the answer by themselves based off of what they already knew, but nobody had taught them how to make those connections and just make observations and ask questions.
So one of the things we don't talk about in science, and even though we saw many of the failures that made good TV, is that there's a lot of frustration involved. Right? I'm guessing that they didn't show the bleep stuff that was necessarily all the stuff.
Editors are amazing.
and again, in a scientific paper, much of what happened to get there is edited out.
Is that why the first line on the back of our cards is, please be aware that many members of your audience may be under 18 years of age?
There you go. I work in a science museum. It's built in. So what makes it worthwhile? What makes that frustration worthwhile? Because there's lots of hours spent in putting one of those myths together. There's lots of hours spent in collecting the data. There's lots of hours building a telescope, putting it down in Antarctica, collecting the data, and then finding dust. So what makes it actually worthwhile to go back and try again?
Well, that aha moment is amazing. That then you finally get there. We were trying to make bones that would break in our Buster crash test dummy, so we needed frangible bones. We were testing different woods, so many different kinds of woods, to see if it broke at the same rate as a wet bone and a dry bone. And it took us, how many, was it like weeks? We had, I think in the end, we had 130 hours of...
We could do a whole season on that.
Of just us doing bone testing just all day, just dropping weights on different pieces of wood. And it was excruciating. But when we finally found that poplar was the right one, it was just such a relief, and we were celebrating a stick. It was so good.
I think they don't edit out the frustration. They edit out the boredom and the repetitiveness. So it's really, what you see is a version of what we did minus all of the super boring stuff. And there's a lot of repetitive stuff that was required to do our testing. And so they just kind of let that fall away, and you get to see the greatest hits.
Mm-hmm. Which is why we were nonfiction and never considered reality, because reality isn't real, strangely enough.
I think in Alzheimer's disease research, as many people know, we still don't have a cure, although we spent a lot of money And we spent a lot of time, and there are a lot of very intelligent people working on this. And so there are two main motivators for many of us who are still in the field. One is we owe it to our patients to keep trying, because it will happen. We need to try more ideas. The other thing is the scientists really like each other as a group. So I think your comment before about the team, and if the team can keep each other entertained and to keep each other from quitting at a critical moment, that's going to be really, really important for staying in it.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's just that sometimes it works. You know, sometimes you do make a difference. It can take years. I've done studies that I spent 10 years on, and you spend that whole 10 years like, what am I doing with my life? And then it works, and you actually see it make a difference. You know, for me, it's the difference in the environment, and you just sit back and just watch the work that you did all just be worth it in the end.
You know, Grant, I don't know about you. Grant and I worked on the prequels to Star Wars. I have the exact opposite feeling, because we worked really hard on Star Wars, and we were like so excited, and then Jar Jar Binks came out and said some words, and we were like, we wasted 1.5 years of our life on that.
And there's, you know, we'd make this incredibly detailed model for a pyrotechnic shot. You spend months making the, was it the reactor room? And then it's over in 1/4 of a second.
Yeah, you're literally like, look, that's, it's gone. I worked on that shot that was gone.
Well, I was impressed.
All right, so we're going to get ready to get to questions. So as the line queues up, now's your chance. We got a mic right in the middle here, so come on up. I'm going to ask you guys one question while people get ready. Sort of my final question is, so what are you guys actively working on now? I want to hear from everybody. What's going on? What's in the hopper?
I just wrote a book. I'm signing them on Saturday at the Harper booth. It's called Crash Test Girl. I also am the COO of a new toy company called Smart Girls. We make a coding robot for girls. We're trying to get more toys that will keep girls interested in STEM. And I just got the go-ahead that I'm shooting a show called Project Explorer. It's going to be sort of a travel adventure show for youth.
Cool.
Okay, that's a hard act to follow.
What are you talking about? You're a neuroscientist. Come on.
So we just got some funding to finally work on improving the diversity of our recruitment into clinical trials. Around the United States, minorities are not necessarily in the minority in large urban centers or in certain rural areas anymore. So we are going to really put the National Institutes of Health's money where our mouths are and do more outreach and figure out how we can build trust in communities that have been very reluctant to get involved in research for very good reasons. And I am very excited about that. That's one of those things that started like 15 years ago that finally, oh my God, there's more people with money who are gonna do something, yeah!
So I'm such a fan of you, by the way.
I know.
So
I'm like,
impressed with you.
I'm not doing anything. Next. I have a couple of shows in development right now. I got a horror movie that I'm actually working on right now, and I'm really excited about this. I have a small production company out in Chicago that wants to produce it, and so that's probably going to start happening at the end of the year. But in the meantime, I just did a cameo on The Orville. I was an alien, and a good friend of mine is the makeup artist on the show, and he called me up, and he was like, hey, do you want to come and be an alien? And I'm just like, dude, I will do whatever you ask me to do. Yes, I will be an alien. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, so we just got some funding to work on anti-poaching technology, because I mentioned I work in marine protected areas, and I see like 3 people in this room going, oh yeah, marine protected areas, right? Because nobody knows what they are. But we've had a lot of problems of folks going into marine protected areas, because that's where you find the most stuff, and fishing out all of that stuff, which is the exact opposite of what we want them to be doing. And so we are working on collecting data both through human observers and also working on technology that we can put out. And I can't tell you what technology we're using. But we do have new technology that can monitor the marine protected areas, and we've actually been able to bust some poachers.
Better than busting it.
I am the celebrity engineer spokesman, which I believe is I'm the first of my kind for Mouser Electronics, an electronics distributor. And the day job is I've been consulting for Walt Disney Imagineering, building the next generation of animatronics for the park. And although I cannot tell you the exact nature of what we're doing, you can look up a video that they just released on YouTube called Stuntronics. And that's my program. So, looking forward.
So I mentioned we have a lot of kids, 2 of whom are 3-month-old twins. So I'm getting a lot of experience with dark matter.
So we know what you're
I always
doing.
like to
Dark matter, did you say?
Yes, I get a lot of experience with dark matter and little bangs in diapers. In addition, I just wrote my first and probably last book called "Losing the Nobel Prize," about my quest to overcome the dust of the cosmos. And besides that, we're building an observatory in the high Atacama Desert of northern Chile at 17,500 feet. And I invite you all down there. So please get in touch with me. And that's going to be an observatory with telescopes that are 20 feet wide and peering back to the very beginning of time to ask the question, what, if anything, came before the Big Bang?
Wow.
All right. I've asked enough questions.
Hi. First, I want to thank you for being like a major influence for me becoming an engineer. So,
Awesome.
thanks for that. And based on like all the scientists on the panel and the episodes of Mythbusters, there's a large diversity of types of science. So I was wondering if the Mythbusters could answer, what's your favorite like type of experiment, whether it be like the mechanical ones or the chemical or the biological, that sort of thing.
I loved when we did historical myths, but as far as the sciences, my favorite experiment we did was for White Rabbit Project, which is our Netflix show that we did when we were, thank you. We did an experiment. We were trying to find out if we could use technology to create superpowers, and I picked mind control. So we hooked up with Backyard Brains, which is they were neuroscientists that were trying to make it more accessible to the general public, and they let me use this amazing little device where I hooked up Tori to a bunch of electrodes.
I get a call from Carrie, and she goes, "Hey, do you want to come have dinner with me?" And I'm like, "Sure, that sounds cool." And I knew it was for the show, but I didn't know exactly what to expect. I show up, and there's like lights, cameras, the producers are there, they're all set up. But Carrie's got this friend who's the scientist, and she's hooked up with these electrodes, and I'm like, "Okay, what are we doing?" And she's like, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit."
There's gonna be pizza and spaghetti and wine, and neuroscientists are actually closet freaks. They are fun. Just saying.
So they start hooking me up, and I'm like, okay. And so he's got the computer chip board out on the table, and I go, should we cover this with like plastic? I mean, what if I spill wine on it? Would that be a problem? He's like, oh, no. The wine won't affect the electronics. Don't worry about it. Now, I'm no electrical engineer. Grant, maybe you can back me up.
I am an electrical engineer, and it definitely will affect the electronics.
So we start the experiment, and I go to take a drink of wine, and Carrie flexes her arm, which causes my arm to flex as well. So she could basically control me. So what happens is I pour the glass of wine, because she's controlling me, on the computer chip, and all of a sudden it short circuits, and my arm gets locked up. And I'm sitting there like this, and I'm like, and it hurts. I mean, it's like electricity going through my muscles. And I'm going, could somebody turn this off? And the producers are all laughing, Carrie's laughing, and they're like, are you faking, or is this actually working? And I'm like, it's working, shut this thing off.
Well, see, we were trying to simulate mind control, and I just made him into my giant puppet because my mind is controlling my muscles, and my muscles are controlling Tori's muscles, and he never got a bite of food or a sip of wine, and I got all the wine I wanted. So I'm going to go with neuroscience.
The episode's available on Netflix. Watch it.
Yeah.
Any of you guys? Physics?
I like the ones where we are, obviously I like the mechanical ones where we build some kind of, machine to do something, but Really, I like the ones where we are not getting seasick, we're not testing hot salsa
Not biology.
cures, and we don't have spiders put on our heads.
Yeah.
Those
That one, I actually enjoyed that one. That was really fun, putting
Yeah.
spiders on your head.
Not so much for
I
me.
like that one.
Grant, in White Rabbit, you built kind of a hovercraft with a whole bunch of propellers.
Yes.
How did you not kill yourself?
I had that same question.
I have many years of experience in not killing myself with dangerous machines. And so what it is the name of the episode is Dude, Where's My Hoverboard? And we were talking to a guy who had a hoverboard in Canada, and that fell through, and he's like, I'm not sure I want to do this. And the producer said, well, couldn't you just build one? And I thought, actually, I think I could. So I took drone parts, the biggest drone motors I could find, Tiger motors, and 29-inch carbon fiber props, and I used 16 of them to create a hovering platform. Not a hoverboard like the balancing wheel one, but a real Marty McFly type hovering board. And the carbon fiber props were not all the way solid. They were segmented in the middle. So if I happened to fall off, which I did many times, they would just simply snap off. And I had a dead man switch, which is something that I was stepping on. So
Dead man switch, that's perfect.
so if I fell off, it would immediately cut power to all the motors, and they wouldn't keep like hitting me in the leg. So luckily, they let me do it.
And how did it work?
It worked great. I flew for several seconds. The problem is that it has so much thrust, it could fly me into the ceiling without even thinking. But our insurance always gets in the way, would only let me fly 3 feet off the ground. And so at 3 feet, and there's no real stability, you're balancing, just like you're on, balancing a dish on the end of a plate. And so after a couple seconds, you start to drift towards the cameraman, or you start to drift towards the wall or the lights. So it was fun. I still have it, by the way.
You don't have to worry about insurance anymore because it's in your house. How high do you go now?
That's right. It's in my shop.
It'll mow the heck out of your lawns. Yes. It's unbelievable.
Hi. I want to know, what were the factors of you three eventually leaving Mythbusters and the factors of you not coming back for the last season or even the last episode?
We came back for the very final episode as like a reunion kind of thing, but all that was up to the suits. We didn't really have much to do with any of that.
Yeah. After 10 years on the air, you have something called viewer fatigue, and so your ratings start to decline. And
do you work for Discovery Channel? Just checking. Before we go any further, I can't say anything without my attorney here. And my attorney is not here.
If I told you, I'd have to kill you. Thank you.
Hey, love you guys.
Hey, what's up, man?
Thank you.
So I was thinking about how you guys had a few tests where like you had extreme failures, where like one was like a cannon you shot a roof of another house.
Do you work for Discovery too? We got plants in the audience.
Go on.
And also you also dealt with like finding discoveries you thought like it was the Big Bang or something. What was it? The center of or like the very glimpse of the beginning of the Big Bang, was it? And you thought it was stardust. How do you deal with like these failures in such a way?
Yeah. For us, we have very understanding neighbors. For things like when we have a nitrogen cannon that isn't totally properly
attached to the table. Okay, fine.
And maybe a grappling hook goes through the wall into the sausage factory next door.
They were sausage people. They were very nice. They didn't ask
nice
a whole lot of
a
questions.
Grappling hook coming straight through the wall.
And you see an eye looking through the hole.
And then it's going,
sorry.
We accidentally drove half a car into when we were in a different shop. We had to keep moving.
Carrie was in the driver's seat. Shocker.
You said
and
go.
I said go,
not
but
no.
I meant start the engine. She started the engine and hit the gas and drove half a car through the wall
Who
into the
cut
neighbors.
the brake line when they cut the car in half?
And they looked through the wall, the hole in the wall, and said, "What are you doing in our shop?"
Yeah. We have a door, you know.
So it sounds like popular science is like regular science. The first thing that happens after a failure is you look for somebody to blame.
Yes.
In our case, in all seriousness, no, we did. It wasn't that there was a complete failure. So we saw something, and the interpretation we had was incorrect. But that gave us the impetus, the energy to go and actually investigate what you saw. So when you do an experiment, you can never remove certain sources of noise, except you can go back and try to do something specifically just to see the noise and get rid of it as much as you can. And that's where we're in the mode now. So we picked ourselves up, as I say, dusted ourselves off of the space dust. But we can't go out into the universe and collect space dust, but we can observe it in other ways. And that's what we're trying to do now. And it really will no longer obscure our search to look back to the very beginning of time. So that's a good question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. How old are you?
Oh boy.
12.
12. What's your name?
Noah.
Hi, Noah.
Do you work for Discovery?
Unfortunately, no.
Just checking.
What myths that you really wanted to do but couldn't do?
We have a lot of them.
We got a list.
Well,
There's a lot of them Tori pitches a lot that they won't even entertain. There's some that we couldn't get on the air because, we couldn't finish them, but our favorites are the ones that Tori have pitched.
One of my favorite, like one I've always wanted to test is going over the Niagara Falls in a barrel. Now, the whole show would be each of us building our own barrel, and you can construct it however sound you want. But then the hook was going to be, like the twist at the end of the episode when we test it, is you would have to test somebody else's barrel.
no way. Balachi.
That would have been a great way to wrap up the show.
Tonight on Mythbusters, the final episode.
A very special Mythbusters.
No, you guys go first. I'm cool.
I think we would have actually figured out a way to do that sooner or later if Niagara Falls would let us do it. It turns out, did you know they could turn them off?
Yeah,
So if anybody tries to do that, they're going to turn off the falls. Apparently they don't want people doing that. Weird. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Natalie, and I basically grew up with you guys as a second family because Mythbusters was always on in our house, so thank you for making science not scary. So now I've gone on into high school, and science is fascinating, and I want to go and learn more and explore more. So thank you, first of all.
Awesome. Thank you.
UCSD has the option on you.
And second of all, what was the most frustrating myth that you guys tried to bust?
Squash weightlifter?
Hellboy fist. Oh, yeah. No, you start with squash weightlifter.
Okay, so squash weightlifter is one of those episodes that never actually made it because the whole premise of this myth was that those giant pumpkins, that the huge giant ones that they grow at the festivals in Monterey, that that had the structural integrity that as it would grow, it could lift an entire car. But apparently none of us can grow a pumpkin bigger than this, even with award-winning seeds, all the hydroponics that California can get us. Like we had like this amazing setup, the best dirt, the best seeds, and we couldn't grow a squash. It was so frustrating. We tried and
we have a gift for killing plant life.
Yeah. Hellboy fist was one where in one of the Hellboy movies, he's got the stone fist, and in order to save someone, he punches the front of an SUV right down, and it flips over him, saves the person. It's tough to align a car, to tow it perfectly, to drop a half-ton steel fist at the perfect moment and have it hit the perfect position on the front of that SUV. we went through more than a dozen Jeep Cherokees. In fact, I think we almost bought out every crappy Jeep Cherokee in Northern California. It was longer. Probably usually takes us about 2 weeks to completely bust a myth, to film it and everything. And this one went on much longer than that. It sucked.
Hi. Is there any way really to constructively engage someone who doesn't believe in science or methodology, refuses to listen, and importantly, won't leave you alone, aside from calling your lawyer?
So is this a personal problem? Like family member, maybe?
You might want to call an attorney.
Well, I think there's definitely an issue in science communication where you have to be very understanding of people that come from a different viewpoint, and we need to come to a place of being nice in our communications.
But what if the different viewpoint is, say, flat Earth with a dome?
That's a tough one. That is a tough one. I mean, I personally just go about it trying to be as respectful as possible, but there's, if we're just not going to all agree.
You can't use facts to refute somebody who doesn't believe in the logical process of argumentation and factual-based evidence. So
yeah, NASA's in on it.
It's a conspiracy. The alleged moon landing, right? We can't talk about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they don't want to believe it, it's kind of pointless. I would say avoid those people. They're entitled to their own opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts.
Try to make it as relatable as possible. Like figure out a way that it would be their concern as well. Like maybe, when you talk to people who don't believe in climate change, if you can come up with a way that it doesn't say, believe in this or you're stupid. It's more like, actually, this is how this affects you and your life. I think that we just have to create more civility.
I mean, I also take the general public's lack of knowledge of science as a failing of the education system. For example, how many people in here could actually refute the flat Earth hypothesis? I can do it. Some of my students can do it. But I would say, less than half maybe of this audience could do it. So learn about it. Learn about how would you refute. If somebody comes up to you and says the Earth is flat, it should be like someone says 2 + 2 is 5. You should understand, you should appreciate all the knowledge that goes into proving it. It's actually fairly complicated and involves some physics and math, but not much. And you can explain it, and the ancient Greeks knew how to do it 2,000 years ago. So there's no excuse for people nowadays not to at least have an answer to a science heretic.
But good luck.
Yeah.
I think another approach that I would throw in is that a lot of people that I've encountered along those lines really are frustrated because they never think anybody's listening to them. It's frustrating to anybody in this room if you feel like you're saying something important, even if it's not true. But if you think it's important, to have somebody say, I'm hearing you, and then paraphrase that back to them, and then, as you were suggesting, try to find the common ground that you share, and then you can go from there. It's really hard when it's red robot on blue robot.
And if that doesn't work, call a lawyer.
Hello.
Hello.
So I just wanted to, I guess this is a question for everybody. So I study biochemistry and music at UCSD. I'm an undergrad there. And and I was just wondering what advice you would have for a young person who isn't sure what direction they want to go, but wants to. I feel like so many people want to pigeonhole themselves and say okay, I'm a math person. That's all I do is math. Or
don't let them do that to you.
I know.
I was a marine biologist.
Whoa.
Yes. And just take every opportunity that you can, especially when you're still in school. There are so many opportunities available to you. The way that I ended up in this field is I would take a class, my professor would tell me what they were working on, and I would think that was interesting, and I would literally follow them down the halls can I help you, can I help you, can I help you, can I help you, until they were like, yes, just please go away. And then I would work in their lab for a little while. Some of it was really cool, some of it wasn't. And so I would just take any opportunity like that I could until I found something that I was really passionate about, and then find someone to pay you for it.
Or internships is a great way to try on many hats and kind of just see what the field feels like. That's how I got my job on Mythbusters.
Cool, thank you.
If you're able to bring those two things together, then you will be
Passion
the
and money.
happiest. Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Tori?
Yeah.
We always
Who do you work- wait.
use the blue rope.
See? Even the kid knows.
Wow.
That is
Who do
such
you
a-
work for?
I love it.
AMC?
I'll hook you up after, kid.
You work for AMC.
That's great.
You work for nobody. You're your own boss. I like you, kid. Keep that attitude.
Following up on that, those are my boys, and
You've
they
trained
both
them
are
well.
They love you guys and watching you guys. We watch it as a family. What's a field that you think would be a really good one to encourage, that you think is really kind of up and coming in the next 10, 15 years?
YouTube
What's really
influencer?
exciting you guys?
Hold on, let me get my crystal ball. No, I think for parents it's a tough thing, but see what they're passionate about. My parents were very encouraging and supportive
would say
of the
understanding.
ridiculous stuff that I was doing. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna do special effects when I grow up. I'm gonna work in the movies. And they were like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. But then they would turn to each other and go, oh my gosh, this kid is he's gonna move home and we're gonna have to support him. So. It's a tough question, but I would just say encourage whatever passion they have and whatever they're excited about. Just don't kill their dreams, because you have no idea where they're going to end up.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, so I was wondering, what was your most interesting myth?
What was your most interesting myth? I mean, I was pretty fascinated by I was like, there's so many. We did over a decade of them. But do you remember when we were doing the Chinese invasion alarm? Where there was this, it was historical myth, and it was brought to us by, I think, a class of 4th graders, where they found it in a history book, where they took these drums that were skinned with goat skin, and they they created these tunnels that were 30 feet deep, and then dropped the drum into them, and they could hear an army that was tunneling towards their castle by listening to changes in sound from the drum vibrating underground. And I just didn't think that myth was going to work at all. And just all of the idea of sound waves and how they work was so fascinating when the myth was actually plausible. I think we were all just celebrating that idea.
And I think that's like any episode where we went in thinking this is probably how it's going to turn out, and it was the exact opposite. Those were our favorite moments. For example, we were testing, are elephants afraid of mice? Now, you've seen it in cartoons. And so Jamie and Adam actually went to Africa. They created this little, trap door that would release a white mouse. And there was these wild elephants, and they walked up, they opened the trap, the white mouse came out, and this elephant lost its mind. And it was like the cartoons were right.
It would have jumped up on a little stool if there was like a stool
If it had
there.
a little tutu.
It would have, yeah.
So anytime we came out completely wrong, I think is when we were the most fascinated.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my question is, what do you think was the most unexpected, crazy result from a myth you've tested?
Deep sea diver, I think, for me. And this is a myth where it's an old-timey canvas dive suit with a brass helmet, and the air supply comes from a pump up on the surface. And the myth is that the pump fails, and the pressure of the water actually crushes the person and forces all the guts and everything up into the helmet. And
So grim.
so we got one of these old-timey canvas dive suits and a brass helmet, and Tori made a meat man.
Sometimes you got to make a meat man.
Because, they didn't want us, obviously you don't want to test on a cadaver, and the pig is the wrong size, the wrong shape, and so Tori made the meat man. The only problem with the meat man, by the way, is not the meat man, but our neighbors actually
I
tell the story.
I spent a week in a freezer truck making this meat man because it had to stay refrigerated or the meat would go bad. So I'm in there like Frankenstein, sewing pieces together around a plastic skeleton. And I have this thing that kind of looks like a man. It's got the right shape. It's got the right weight. I'm like, we got a meat man. Now, during the night, this refrigerator, every
20 minutes or half hour, the generator would kick on to keep it cold. So our neighbor jumped over the fence because he lived right next door, and that generator was keeping him awake, and turned off the generator. So when I came in the morning, there was flies coming out of the trailer, and it was warm, and I'm like, oh my God, what happened? We broke a fuse or whatever, and I lifted it up, and the smell that came out, it was rotten meat, and I'm like, that son of a gun, that neighbor turned it off because there was no other explanation. So anyway.
It's the day of the experiment, by the way. So Tori has to give the meat man a bleach bath, and we put him in the suit, and we send him down 400 feet. And so I'm working the valve that simulates the failure in the suit, in the pump system. And I open the valve, and we're all in this like confined space watching on our UAV, the video feed. And I open it up, and suddenly the whole area fills with this rotten meat smell.
But it worked. Like, the pressure of the water actually squished the man into the helmet. And we were like, yeah! And then all of a sudden the wind came in from the suit, and we're like,
yeah.
We actually have a very special inventory in our heads of all the different smells that are the rankest smells on Earth that I don't know if people know about, like female wolf in heat, really stinky.
Earwax that's been heated in a pan, human earwax.
Oh, goat horn on a bandsaw,
Yeah.
bile.
Yeah.
Come on, Tori, what
Cow
you got?
femur. Cow femur.
Shark.
Adam's feet.
Yes. Shark
Vilest
skin
of all.
that is curing in your own urine. Yeah. Oh, rendering plant. We know all of these by smell. It's memories, sense memories.
Good thing they don't have smell-o-vision.
The wonders of science.
And Comic-Con on a really, really hot day.
Yeah, that's a dirty thing.
That's right. All right, I'm getting multiple signs to say we have to wrap it up. So I would like to thank our panelists. Let's give them all a round of applause. Carrie and Tiffany, Tori, Angela, Grant, and Brian, thank you guys for coming out. If you have not had enough of Mythbusters, I'll do one final plug. From 11 to 1 tomorrow, they will be up in the exhibit hanging out. So
At the
come
Fleet
on by.
Science
At
Center.
the Fleet Science Center, right up, easy Uber ride away. Thank you guys for coming, really appreciate it. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you guys.
Have a great
Thanks a
time
lot.
in San Diego.
Yeah, so that thing's been sitting there and it was recording the speaker. I don't know if it's technical or if someone put it there.